supposed to be the first of this month, and now it's a little bit longer, so we'll just have to see. The new chairs, you know, that's been rehearsal.
I didn't hear about that.
Haven't been in there. Yeah, and that's a good workout. Well, the new chairs have arrived, so we'll have to get around to. Usually I take care of the vestments, but we'll have to get everybody after all that in there. Stephen tried to close the doors and everything, but still some dust. So we'll have to have a complete wash vest. Usually we have each person take their own, but there's a whole bunch more, you know, that are reserved. We need. Yeah, that's true. We're hard to have room. Stephen is, I wouldn't call him a hoarder, but he was in lost. And when he moved in, half the room left.
For a quick
I'm fine, thank you. I need to go make some changes.
So anyway, it was great to see you.
What happened? The kids were on
Good morning. You're our speaker today.
Good to see you.
Very good.
My kids were
You're
I'll try to be loud, but with Matt's
the.
guys, that's what we are.
Oh, we must have
That for church, we all like that, see what was going on. That was my life. See it well, I guess. I'm sorry.
No.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning on this Sunday, cold but first Sunday of February. To those who are joining us virtually, welcome as well. We are delighted to be here this morning in the Adult Forum at the Cathedral Church of the Nativity with the Reverend Dr. Deborah Appler, Professor of Old Testament and Hebrew Bible at Moravian Theological Seminary, as well as Program Director for the MACH program. Deborah, welcome.
Okay, I will take my mask off. I guess it'll be fine. Well, it's so good to be here. Can you hear me now? Okay. All right, I'll try to stand close to this area. Bill, I'm going to ask you to give me a 5-minute warning. Okay. It's good to be here. I bring greetings from Moravian Theological Seminary, and I'm grateful to be in the space where not only you all are present, but also Canon Granfield and the work that he does in the community along with you all. It's a real blessing. So with Bethlehem Interfaith Group and other places where you are in the community, it's very helpful, especially around issues around sustainability and justice. And so today, that's pretty much what we're going to start with. We're going to do 2 weeks together. 1 week we'll focus on the biblical ethics, which of course takes us straight to Genesis. It's hard not to do that when we're talking about the Bible and creation care. And then next week, I'll take us, unless I hear from other people that you want to go in a different direction, to ethical eating, which would also connect up with sustainability. So that's where I'm going. So I want to start with a poem by Hildegard of Bingen about creation. And then I'm going to get us deep into, well, not deep, but we're going to get into Genesis for a bit. Glance at the sun, see the moon and the stars. Gaze at the beauty of earth's greenings. Now think, what delight God gives to humankind with all these things. All nature is at the disposal of humankind. We are to work with it, for without it, we cannot survive. Those are really powerful words and born through the biblical text. Now, I don't know if you all are talkers. If I ask you questions, will you respond or? Okay, okay, I'm gonna try. Okay, good. All right, that's good to hear. Now, I said we were gonna go into Genesis, and we will, but I wanna start somewhere else first. One of the most beautiful biblical Bible texts is the Song of Songs. And in that particular song, it is a song that symbolizes a love either between two humans or, as the church has said, between Christ and the church. And as Judaism says, the love between God and Israel. But Phyllis Tribble, an incredible biblical scholar, ties it up to the Garden of Eden, that it's almost a repair of the brokenness from the garden. And within the Song of Songs, there are things called wasfs. And it's on that slide, it's at the top, W-A-S-F. And that is actually the Arabic word for description. And these are great to read at marriages because the bride and groom always get turned red when you hear them. But they are good wedding texts. This is a description from a woman or a man with his or her partner. And so I want to read this, but as I read it, I want you to think about and if you could, share a little bit about what this description tells us about the relationship or the attitudes that the humans have toward God's creation. So here it is. It's going to be a little bit embarrassing at moments. How beautiful you are, my love. How very beautiful. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats moving down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes that have come up from the washing, and all of them bear twins, and not one of them among us is bereaved. Your lips are like a crimson thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David built in courses, and on it hanging 1,000 bucklers, all of them shields of warriors. Your 2 breasts are like 2 fawns, twins of a gazelle that feed among the lilies. Okay, so this is the description. Actually, there's a really funny picture that I did not bring that gives an illustrated form of it, and it looks really weird. But having read this, what does this say about how they view the non-creation, non-human creation? What are some of the images that pop out? What do they use to describe their love, the description? Yes?
Daily routine.
Daily routine, right. Okay, so you've got that.
Everyday animals that they're dealing with, I guess. I mean, we don't relate to that, but I'm sure they do at that time. Yeah, that's a really powerful thing, and that's one of the things too, along with what you shared, that I want people to think about, is that they looked at nature. They saw nature as beautiful. That if you're sharing something, we're going towards Valentine's Day, if you're sharing something to someone you love and you pull out an ugly, awful metaphor, and I'm not going to say anything because that might not be what is it? A weed is perspective. You know, what you call a weed. And so I don't want to name anything because it might not be what you agree with. And I don't want to get in trouble. However, but they picked things that were beautiful to them, like pomegranates, like deer. The image of the goats flocking down the mountain. Have any of you been to Israel-Palestine before? So do you remember seeing those, oftentimes you see sheep or goats on the hill. And when there's a group of them, they actually do look like hair somewhat. And so that would, as you say, everyday life, they would have seen that. That would have meant something to them. So in a way, Song of Songs, when you read the whole book, there's imagery around animals, plants, and all of God's creation that is woven together in this incredible, passionate story of the love that these people have for one another and the world around them. So I figured it made sense to start there. However, we cannot talk about sustainability without talking about Genesis. And the reason for that is because these origin narratives are so central to how we view our relationship to God and to one another. Now, I want to say that, and I'm guilty of this too, that as I read Genesis narrative, I often go straight to humans, okay? Hey, I want to know about me and my relationship with God. Let's go straight there and just forget the rest. But when we read it, the human part, especially, I put 2 stories up here. The first one is Genesis 1:1 through 2:4. And that is considered part of a later tradition by the priestly tradition who were more into order. And so we kind of get a sense of what order everything came into. When we read the second narrative, which is Adam and Eve, we get into a narrative where the orders are different. So some people disagree if there are 2 different ones, but most scholars agree that there are 2. And so we're going to look at both of them in tandem, in relationship, because they share with us. So I'm going to read Genesis 1:9 through 25, and I want you to pay attention to the non-human relationship to God, okay? Non-humans. What is their relationship to God? And so if you can think of any words, images, or even principles that may stand out. So here is Genesis, and I'm reading this Bible. It's an NRSV version, but it's called the Green Bible. Instead of a red letter where it red letters everything Jesus says, it green letters everything that has to do with the environment and creation. It's a really good little resource. So if you're interested in that, the Green Bible, published by, who are they published by? HarperCollins. HarperCollins. Okay, Genesis 1:9 through 25. And God said, "Let
the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together God called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give the light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things and wild animals of the earth of every kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Okay. Sometimes we don't catch it when we don't hear it out loud. So what are some words or images or repetitions or things that kind of stuck out for you?
It was good.
Good. So yes, that the word good, everything is called good. And I'm going to go a little step farther in a minute, but let's start there. Yeah, so it is good. That's really important because good means beautiful or good or it works. It means it's created in the way that makes sense. So it's good. Everything, not just a few things, everything is good. Yes, good. Good. Anything else?
I was intrigued that the earth obeyed God. So the earth brought forth vegetation. The sea brought forth animals. So that's not something I've noticed before, that there's obeying God.
Yeah, they're in relationship with God. They hear God and they obey is very good because in this narrative, and I started later in, but it makes a very great point that God creates through word. And so they hear, and word, the word for, in Hebrew, davar, Shema, means hear and also obey. So they hear and they obey, but the word is the creative force. And I think that's really important because that's going to get into something we're going to talk about in a little bit. Yeah, they obey. Good. Anything else you were going to?
As you were reading, I was wondering, in God's process of doing one thing after the other, but at each point saying it was good.
Mm-hmm.
It stood alone as being good, and then the next days or activities was good. And I began to think, does that mean? I think a lot of us people tend to think all these things were made with us ultimately in mind. Could it have been stopped right there was that God's intent was to prepare the earth for people to take over? Or would it have been, am I making any sense
You are
at
making
all?
sense. And Genesis continues, and we're going to go there. We're going to get there. There's a word that has been used a lot, dominion, radah, and we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
So we'll get there. Good. I wanted us to thank you for bringing that up because that's going to be important as we talk about sustainability and creature care. Yes.
I was noticing they were, the text was talking about all the different animals in the sea, the creatures, the way they're all described. And then it says, be fruitful and multiply. So that was just interesting in terms of thinking about all of these different creatures, so many that we don't know about or that we take for granted, or that maybe we don't like some of these animals, like mosquitoes or something.
Yeah, I was going to say mosquitoes are okay and gnats.
Yeah, but this idea that they all should be fruitful and multiply, they're all made for a reason.
Yeah, they all have a purpose. And we're going to look at a couple of those as well. Yeah. Did anybody else notice some of the repetition that we hear in this? And we kind of talked about it, or I kind of said. But that's repeated. Good is repeated. Be fruitful and multiply is repeated.
And then there was morning, and then there was evening, and then there was morning, so designated time.
That's designated time, absolutely. So it's within a time frame. Yes. Anything else? Did you catch, and I did mention it, so maybe it's a deja vu all over again, but the idea of every kind. So there's a inclusivity that comes about through creation, that every kind is created by God. Here's so we've already talked about Tov, of every kind, and that's repeated 10 times in these verses. 10 times, that's a lot. So when you hear something repeated in the biblical text, you want to pay attention as to why. And I think there's an ethic, there is an ethic in recognizing that everything is created in its way, in its kind, and by God, and it is good. And that has so many ethical connotations. Did you notice that God blesses the animal, the creation, the non-human creation? I'm going to be using non-human creation because we know that God blesses humans, but to remember that God blesses all living creations and says, be fruitful and fill the waters and the seas and let the birds multiply on earth. God also includes the animals and every part of creation in the covenant with Noah, with the rainbow. That's in verse 9, Genesis 9:12. You can look that up later. Okay. The other thing, let me read a little bit farther. Let's go ahead and do that, just so you can hear the farther part. I'll continue with humans. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind. In God's image, in the image of God, God created them. Male and female, God created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over everything that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in its fruit you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life. I have given every green plant for food, and it was so. God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. Now pay attention to who God might be looking at when God is doing this. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that God had done, and God rested on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it
God rested from all the work that God had done in creation. So who rests on creation, on Sabbath? All animals, everything God makes is to rest. And we see this clearly in Deuteronomy 5, where they make it clear in the Sabbath commandment that both humans and animals and every part of creation should rest. So non-human creation is included in the call for the Sabbath. All are placed in the Garden of Eden. And I think that's something to keep in mind. There isn't a thing that was created that wasn't in the Garden of Eden at first. And certainly things changed, but that's where they started. And Eden means pleasure. So it's a pleasurable place. It also can mean fruitful. So it's a very powerfully creative space. And I already talked about the flood. The other word that is that's repeated many times in many forms is the word seed. Seeds are important. Keep that in mind, because that's an issue in sustainability conversations about seeds. Who owns them? Who's patenting them? Where do they belong? Who has access to them? And how they impact different nations who might rely on certain seeds and have to buy them instead of replant them. So seeds. All right, so let's go back to what you asked, and the word of dominion. And that is a very controversial word. I don't know if I mentioned this already. I teach Bible and politics, and we talk about environment. And this is the word that gets pulled in all the time for justification to do whatever we want with the earth. That it's given to us. It's our land. We can do with it as we want. God says it. It's right here. And I will say that the dictionary gives a sense of to rule, which does suggest that. However, as I've looked at several scholars who have spent a lot of time on this work, and so I have to be honest to the dictionary. However, let me say something about the dictionary and lexicons. These are placed together by people, committees, who have looked at how these verses are used in different contexts, and from that, they are able to come up with some sort of definition. And that's why in Hebrew, which is an economic language, you will find multiple interpretations for the same word. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is some human bias in all of our interpretations and all of my interpretations, that is inherent in how we interpret. We try not to, but hey, we're human. But the word to rule. So what does that mean? Does it mean that we get to do what we want with the land? Does it mean stewardship with the land? And are we creation keepers like Randy Woodley, a indigenous a Hebrew Bible scholar, suggests that we're creation keepers? So many times we look at other parts of the biblical text to help shed some light on this, and we don't even have to go that far. We can go to Adam and Eve and that narrative. And that helps us to get a better sense, if we tie them together, of what God intends for us as humans in our relationship with the rest of creation. Chapter 2, verse 15. I'm not going to go into all the Adam and Eve stuff, okay? That's for another time. But just the stuff that has to do with creation. The Lord took the man, or the Adamah, I'm quoting from the NRSV. So the Lord took Adam and put Adam in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. That is what the NRSV says. But if you look closely at the Hebrew, that is not a wrong interpretation, but there are better ones, I think. The Hebrew for till is avad. It comes from the term avodah, which means to work or to serve, okay? To serve the land. Eved Adonai, servant of God. Basically Eved, you've seen in different parts of the biblical text. It means to serve. So Adamah, who hasn't at this point become man, he's kind of an earthling. The job that this earthling has is to work with, to serve the land. How many of you grow gardens? How many of you can just put a seed in the ground, let it go, and not deal with it anymore?
Well, actually, I have to confess that sometimes mine too.
Sorry, what's the right answer?
No, actually, I mean, maybe you've worked out a way to do it, but oftentimes, I don't know, for our gardens, how about you? Does it work when you just leave it alone?
Oh, you need to take care, you need to water, you need to
Yeah.
fertilize, depending upon the seed.
Right. And you're right. There are some that you can just let go and it just works fine. But I mean, but generally speaking, there's a relationship between plant and human to try to make it work to its best advantage. And so for gardening, we recognize that it's working together, and we'll talk more about this next week, but it's working together with nature and with the seed to help it to grow and to help it produce. So to serve it makes sense that there's a symbiotic need, because I don't know about you all, but I want those tomatoes to grow because I want to eat them. And if I don't eat them, my husband, who's sitting over there, he always makes fun of me because I don't like pruning things. And he feels strongly about pruning. And it is important to prune, because if you don't, they get crowded, they can't grow to their fullest potential, and then we don't get to eat as much. So it's a win-win, working with our relationship with the natural world. So to serve. And then the Hebrew for to keep. Now, if we read keep, sometimes we can say that in an English way, like, okay, well, we can keep it. We can till it and keep it because it's ours. That's not what the Hebrew means. It's shamar. It can mean to keep, but it most often is used for to watch or to observe or preserve. Okay, so there's a little bit more openness to the interaction and to the idea of stewardship. And it works both ways, because the animal, we're working with the plant. The plant is working with us. It's a win-win. Yes.
So just tell me that you didn't go, is the Old Testament written in Hebrew?
Yes. Well, not all of it. Aramaic in parts, but mostly.
So I've just revealed my base knowledge. Thank you.
That's okay.
So tell me you didn't go from Hebrew to New Revised Standard Version to the Hebrew word for new. Tell me that you went all the way back to the origin.
That gets really complicated.
So the word that got translated to till originally was what word?
Hebrew. It was the Hebrew word avad.
Okay. So
that was the original.
Okay.
Yeah, and when we say original, that gets really complicated, because then there are those who say that Hebrew Bible scholars are Masoretic texts focused, where the Septuagint, which is written in Greek, some of it is older than some of the Hebrew that's written that we have preserved. So that's a whole conversation in its own. But I will say that what they're translating is the Hebrew, and when I looked at the Greek, they stay pretty much the same, where they translate a corresponding Greek word that connects back to the Hebrew word that they're translating when they go to Greek. I know, it gets very complicated.
No, I didn't want it to be from Hebrew to the Queen's English to German.
No, yeah.
German,
I see what you're saying.
To Austrian,
yeah.
To French,
yeah.
Back to English.
No, the NRSV is from Hebrew to, this part of the NRSV, because they use multiple sources to put together the NRSV, they look at the Septuagint as well and try to adjudicate what's the best. But I can say that this particular text went from Hebrew to English in the NRSV. Does that help? It's a straight line from Hebrew and English. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And it would be interesting to see how it translates in Swahili or German or other, and I might ask one of my colleagues.
Or translated by an agrarian culture.
And let me say about that. Next week we will talk about that, an agrarian reading from a wonderful scholar, Ellen Davis, who wrote the book that I wish that I had written, where she does read it from the agrarian perspective, and I have drawn her in as well, and that's how she would translate it as well. That most people who've looked at it closely say, whoa, you can translate this differently. And one of them, very clearly, the word means serve. It does. I mean, there's no It's not complicated. I mean, there's multiple ways you can look at it, but serve is certainly one of the reasonable, it's not a farce, it's not a stretch at all. It's actually a meaning of the word. So, yeah. So, yes.
No, it's just, this seems to come up often when we hear what the real definition is. Then you think, well, why did they pick till instead of serve then?
Well, till,
What a different emphasis there.
that's a good question. I mean, the basic thing, basically when you think about it, when you work the land, although today when you talk about farmers, some of them go no-till. So that gets a little bit outdated too. They are working on newer translations that deal with those kind of issues. But for them, they were probably thinking, well, if you're working the land or if you're serving the land, you're tilling it. You're doing something that's going to allow it to grow more fully. So that's why they chose that way of looking at it. But these are done in committee, and they do make decisions. And oh my goodness, my Hebrew class, we go off all the time on the different ways that is like, why did they choose that translation? Why did they do that? It could have been this, and this would have been more justice. I tend to go with the translations that make sense in the context, but also that are ethically helpful. And I feel that this is one of them. And one of the things that I will say is that Ellen Davis, who has done lots of work on this kind of work, she's an agrarian. She's worked with farmers and had conversations with them, but also grows. She wrote scripture on tradition and agriculture. And then Ellen Bernstein, who read from a Jewish perspective, also came with these. And they were just two of many who have interpreted that word as to serve. So it's not unusual, but it's not something that we see a lot, and especially politically at times. So the other thing I do want to point out, and I'm going to watch the time because I want to get us into some other things too, that when we read with Adam and Eve's narrative, that if we look closely, we see that both the animal kingdom and humans, because we are animals actually, so human animals and other animals are all made with soil or clay. All came from Adamah, which I really don't know if we emphasize enough. We come from the same mold, the same materials. God created us. And Randy Woodley, who, as I said earlier, is a scholar, says that we are literally, and I think one could say a cow, a dog, a horse, maybe even fish. Fish are, the water animals are very interesting because sometimes they're left out of the conversation, but the sky animals and the earth animals are considered part of the creation through Adamah. And there's a play on the Hebrew. Adam, the earthling, is made from Adamah, ground, soil. Just like some people use the phrase humans from humus, that there's a play on words to in the biblical text, but animals come from the same material that humans do. And that's pretty powerful when we think about it. If any of you have an animal that you love, you probably already know this. But yeah, any comments, questions on that? Okay, so I want to say something about a man named scholar Arthur Walker Jones, who talks about an ecological spirituality. He wrote a book called The Green Psalter, Resources for an Ecological Spirituality. And these are readings. So we're going to look at two different approaches to reading biblical texts from ecological perspectives. There are multiple ones, but the two I'm going to look at are, or bring to your attention, is Jones's, and then next week, Ellen Davis with the agrarian reading. And Jones emphasizes the concept of the community, the earth community that we see in not only the Psalms, but we can apply this to Genesis, the whole biblical text. And a green eco-justice reading recognizes creation's, quote, intrinsic worth, interconnectedness, voice, and identification, unquote, and that all species have a direct relationship to God. So I'm going to unpack some of this, okay? All species have a direct relationship to God. And I'm going to skip that one. Okay. We already talked a little bit. I'm going to pull in some biblical texts, but the interconnectedness. You all have probably spent some time thinking about bees and earthworms.
I can't wait till you get to mosquitoes.
You know what? I will bring mosquitoes in next week because I really do think that we need to think about mosquitoes a little bit. I mean, as someone who's spent some time in Tanzania and Kenya, they are frightening because they, with malaria and other diseases. But nevertheless, they do serve a purpose and they are part of the food chain. So that's kind of important. But I understand what you're saying about that. I'm trying to see where. Here we go. Earthworms. Earthworms, I bring this up because it became a political issue several years ago that Congress and different groups were taking away funding for earthworm research. And so people started looking closely at the importance of earthworms. And again, with our gardens, we're excited when we see worms in them. And why do we care if there's an earthworm in our garden?
It serves the soil.
Yes.
I meant till. I meant serve.
Well, it does till the soil. It does. It goes through. No, it does. It bores holes in the soil. It lets the air in. It releases the carbon dioxide, and basically allows the it works through the system. And also, I didn't realize this until I did more research again yesterday on earthworms, that they're used to treat a variety of wastes. So they would put them into sludge and paper mills, or even in biosolids because they are able to break them down into organic compounds that are safe. So earthworms are really important. And what I learned in the Lehigh Valley is that most of our worms are not indigenous to this place, according to the Pennsylvania Department of the Extension Office, but that we do have earthworms, and I know we have plenty of them in the backyard. There is one. Have any of you seen the invasive jumping earthworm? I have not seen it, but that one is not good, according to the Extension Office. But nevertheless, earthworms are incredibly important, and they make a difference in how we are able to work a garden and live our lives. Not only work a garden, but clean up our mess. They're a part of the ecological process. The other one are bees, and I'm sure you've all heard a lot about bees and their importance, but it is kind of overwhelming. I mean, when you think about, according to some of the sites that I look at, that 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 bites of food that we eat on a daily basis come about because of bees, of their pollination, their that we really are reliant on them. I belong to, and it's a really good group. If you're ever interested in it, let me know. It's Rodale does a book reading club every year, and we read all sorts of really cool books about soil and raw milk and environmental change and dyes and all sorts of things. And we read a lot about bees and also almonds. And I live off of almond butter. And that if without bees, I will not get that. We will not have those. We will not have many of our nuts. We won't have many of our fruits because we need them to pollinate. And so there is a major decline in bees, and there have been many things that the world has done to try to undo that, and that's a good thing. So we're starting, hopefully, to see more growth in bees. But again, the interconnectedness between humans and the human creation and the non-human creation. And I could go on and on. You all know that. I do want to recommend, I'll do land first. We'll go back to land next week. Soil. And I love this. There's a TED Talk called Stop Treating Our Soil Like Dirt, which I like. and actually, I had forgotten this, but 2015 was National Soil Year, the year of soil. But soil is so important to our food and our life. It's our lifeline. Not only are we created by it, through it, according to Genesis, it's a natural water filtration. It grows our food. And so there's a lot of issues around topsoil and how to preserve it. A lot of that's been washed away. And it also can store carbon, which is part of the climate change issue. And so scientists are looking at ways in which they can utilize the ability of soil to help us. Right here on the side is a terracing. It's not a great picture. There's a lot of it. But in ancient Israel, they recognized the need to work the soil in a way that, so they worked it, they tilled it. I had the opportunity at Ramat Rachel and also at Jezreel and other places to look at some of these terraces where they would bring soil in to grow in order to, because one of the problems they had sometimes is that they didn't have the right soil in the highlands. And secondly, that they recognized that if they did not terrace these areas to grow their grapes or their vineyards, their olives, or sometimes their vegetables, they had to have water drip down. And so they terraced in order to do that. It took a lot of time and a lot of people. And so terracing is an incredibly important environmental way in which the ancient Near East and especially the Israelites worked toward getting things under control for growing. All right, Ellen Davis, who I've talked about a million times, writes, land degradation is a sure sign that humans have turned away from God. Conversely, the flourishing of the land marks a return to God. In short, the Old Testament represents the condition of the land as the single best index of human responsiveness to God. Yeah, that the land is essential. And it makes sense because their understanding and our understanding as it grows is that we are part land. We are walking land, okay? And so if our land is not healthy, then we're not healthy. And we know that. I mean, if there's carcinogens, if there's not enough topsoil in order to grow food, we know that, I mean, I feel for our brothers and sisters over in areas where they're dealing with incredible fires that are destroying everything. That has an impact on our food source here. The flooding that happens that washes away everything, that has an impact on us here. And we could go on and on and on about that. But the land is extremely important. This is, going back to what you said, in many ways, these are agrarian people. They work the land. That is how they live. They know what it is to have a famine. They know what it is if they don't take this seriously, even though they can't control everything. They know that, but God controls it. But I just thought that was really powerful, that whole idea of the two of them hand in hand. So I wanted to say a couple more things about, move us in a different direction. What do we learn from other parts of creation? And Job tells us, and this is in the biblical text that we don't always pay attention to. Job 12:7. But ask the animals, and they'll teach you. The birds of the air, and they'll tell you. Ask the plants of the earth, they will teach you. And the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all of these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In God's hands is the life of every living being and the breath of every human being. Okay, this is a plug. I do not make any money off of this, but I highly recommend, if you have not read this book, there's a book out there by a botanist, Potawatomi, named Robin Kimmerer. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. And their understanding is similar. Okay, the first chapter, you're going to read her interpretation of Adam and Eve's story. And it's not really positive because we haven't necessarily, as at least the United States, taken it as seriously as we should have, our relationship, our stewardship. So I disagree in her reading. I think we can read the biblical text in a way that is helpful. But what she does is she talks about how in Potawatomi tradition, and many others, but I'm going to speak to hers because that's what she speaks to, is that they recognize that all of creation, oh, am I in your way? No, okay, I just want to make sure. They're elders, that they are the elders. They were created first. The rocks, they knew more than the people did. The trees, they were there first. The soil, they were there first. And so what better way to get wisdom than to talk to the elders? So she takes her students all over the place to learn from ecosystems. And many of you may have heard about the trees and how they can communicate with each other and that they share. They teach community. They share. Like if tree over here doesn't have enough food, then they work it so that it moves over to tree number 4 and they get food. It's fascinating. She deals with maple trees. She looks at strawberry vines. She looks at a pond full of scum and stuff and the ecosystems and cleaning it out. It is one of the best books, not only in information, but she is beautifully written. And really, so many people, one person who read it said that was the last book they had to read. They were done. They could stop. I highly recommend it. And what's nice about it is you can read a chapter and they're really small and do it over a period of time. So they're independent little things. But honestly, I think that that's really important. And the understanding is that non-human creation can teach us so much about community and how to live together as better human beings, and with them. Okay, questions, comments, anything? Okay. I want to say that oftentimes we forget, or maybe I'm speaking, I forget, I'll just say me, maybe you haven't forgotten, that creation has agency in the Bible. It's not just us acting on them. They have agency. They actually act as well, and they have a role. So I'm going to show you some. There's so many, but here's some. Okay, Isaiah, great book. Second Isaiah, end of it. Celebration, woohoo! There's salvation. We're going home, yay! And I'm not a major trilogy. What is it? The Hobbit. The movie, The Lord of the Rings. But remember the Ents in that the tree people. Well, here you've got there's a lot of tree people in the book of Isaiah. But right here, this is at the end of the second Isaiah, where they're celebrating the joy of being able to go home. For you will go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come the cypress. Instead of the briar shall come the myrtle. And it shall be to the Lord for a memorial, for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. So there's a celebration of the trees. They're part of salvation. If we go, they go. They know it. If they live, we live. Luke 19:40, Jesus answered, I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout out. We've got screaming stones in the New Testament, okay? The stones talk. But we know, I do archaeology, but I don't do paleo, the stone stuff. They can tell a lot by reading stones. Stones tell stories. And so there is a sense that they're part of creation. Non-human creation has an agency, expressing pain from human hubris. This is from Romans 8:19 through 23. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now, and not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. That's the Apostle Paul. That they are part of salvation, and they suffer when we suffer. The lawsuit, I love this. There are lots of little what we call reeb, which means contention. It's spelled like rib. Hosea 4:1-3 says, hear the word of the Lord. Notice the role of creation in this. Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel. And by the way, they're in a lot of trouble because they have been following other gods. Okay, so God's bringing them to court. God is frustrated with them, so here they go. For the Lord has an indictment, a reeb against the inhabitants of the land. There is no faithfulness or loyalty, and no knowledge of God in the land. Swearing, lying, and murder, and stealing and adultery break out. Bloodshed follows bloodshed. Listen to this next thing. Therefore, the land mourns. Why? That's human stuff. Why is the land mourning? And all who live in it languish, together with the wild animals, the birds of the air, even the fish of the sea are perishing. Human sin creates chaos and death for non-humans. And it works both ways. I find that really powerful. So humanity has agency, but so does non-human creation. Okay, whoops, did I go back? What happened? Here we go. There we go. All right, I'm not gonna show the video, but you can search it. Winona LaDuke, who is a basically a indigenous person, connected very much politically, but also with the whole idea of sustainability. She tells a story. I cry every time I see it, and I watched it again yesterday. Of the Pawnees who lived in Nebraska, and they were moved out of their land, and they were moved to Oklahoma. And when they left, they brought with them their seeds, their yams, their corn, their different seeds, and they took them to the land with them. They planted them. They would not grow. No matter what they did, they wouldn't grow. And so they were in conversation with the people in Nebraska and said, we have a few seeds left. Nebraska, they asked them, would you be willing to plant your seeds up here in Nebraska? And they talked about it a bit. She goes into the details. And they decided to do it. They took the seed back to Nebraska, put it in the ground, it grew. They started growing. And so they had a Pawnee celebration day where they invited like 8,000 people came home. So she calls it a story about redemption, but it's also a story about seeds. The seeds remembered the land they came from, is what she said. Seeds have spiritual meaning. They know their sacred space. They know where they belong. And the need in itself of the seeds to their land. They needed their land. Nebraska was their land. And when they got back to their land, because they knew it, they were able to grow again. That is such a powerful story. It's worth looking up Winona LaDuke Redemption and watching it. It's powerful. So what is the ethic? I know we're running out of time. We have like 4 minutes, 3 minutes? Yeah, okay. To see the earth as sacred, to respect every part of God's creation, every part, every single part, even that mosquito and the gnat, and those that we don't really respect as much. And that doesn't mean you have to hang out with them, okay? But to figure out a way to live or to create some space for them, to honor God's call to us to serve creation, to serve the ground, and to watch and see what is needed and how not to harm other creatures. To view ourselves in community with nature, we need each other. Oh, I thought this was really cool. This was on the internet yesterday, and everything on the internet is right, so it's cool. Okay, so they said that in Canada, at least one, maybe more, of their health, of their insurance companies are providing coverage for people in Canada to go to their parks, their national parks, that they're paying for tickets for them to go to their national parks because they realize that part of the health is to be in nature. And I thought that was really cool, so I hope that happens down here pretty soon. It also means to take seriously, and we'll talk more about this next week, how and what we consume and how it impacts all of creation. And this is really important for me to remember because I forget, to recognize that all creatures are part of the covenant. All creatures, rocks and trees and gnats and armadillos, all of them are part of creation. So I could stop here. I had a couple others, but I'll stop here. Any comments or questions or anything you want to share? Yes?
You bring great enthusiasm to the room. But under their breath, do any of your students mutter, wow, she is wacko?
Oh no! I hope I didn't come across that bad. But no. I think that one thing that my students say is they don't fall asleep. And that's a gift. Keep them asleep, especially 6 to 9 classes. Those are hard, 6 at night. Yes.
So I don't know if it's opened yet, but it's soon to open, one of the hydroponic farms here in Lehigh Valley. Do you have a position on that? I mean, is that just because we've screwed up so much of the soil that this is now an option, that we're making this an option? Or do you think this is a good option because it's another way to grow things?
I would have to do more research because I've looked into it, but not so much as the whys. But it does make sense that it does offer opportunities for places without much soil, like cities, and some of it could be because they don't have the proper soil in which to grow, but it is another way to grow. And I think every single way we can find new ways of doing it. Next week I'll show some, people have grown gardens in the back of their pickup trucks in the cities and on rooftops in the city and different places. So hydroponics takes place in other places too. That's a good question. I'd have to look into that. I'll look and see what I can find out this week and bring it back. Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Anybody else? All right, well then next week what we're going to look at is take some of this, but we're going to go into ethical eating because I think that's really ties into a lot of the material around creation and such. So, all right, well thank you. Thanks for your time together, and I look forward to next week. Thanks. Oh, thanks. Oh, mask on.
Turn this off and I'm on a raw energy.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anything you need?
No, but was this okay?
This was fabulous. Oh my gosh, it was wonderful.
Okay,
I was
thanks.
delighted.
I never know what people want, so I'm always worried.
No, I thought it was remarkable, and I think
Seeing this in scripture is so
Yeah, well, I will keep doing that. That's all I know.
Absolutely. Thanks to God for it. See you tomorrow morning for
Okay, see you next. I'll see you next week.
My man who was a professor of geography. This is maybe 15 years ago. I can't remember his name. But he developed all these theories about how
every day, like the third day or fourth day.
plant culture, people culture moved easily east and west. Climate was about the same. But it moved very slowly south. And
supposed to slowly get warmer. I was wondering that later on.
corn evolved in maize, corn evolved in South America. It took it a very long time to get up to where, when William Penn landed here, the Indians had it, because they had to make all these. And apparently these native people who you would think were